Have you ever had one of those moments when you do something and you think, oh, my mum did that. My mum does that. Now I'm doing it. I had one of those moments on the way over here. We were driving here and all of a sudden we saw a fire truck go past. And if you know my mum, she prays for every fire truck, every ambulance. If someone goes past you and they're in a fire truck or an ambulance, that's it, you've got to pray. And now I do the same thing too, if I have them going past me. And we saw one going past this morning and we sort of looked at each other and thought, gee, I hope that's not like a Mother's Day breakfast that's gone bad or something. The kids have burnt the toast or something like that. But, you know, I think it's a real blessing. My mum's an incredible mother, and I find that I'm doing things, but it's only because she's been that example for us, an incredible example for us. Where's Josh? I don't know if I can add to your wisdom. You're very wisdomous. Like the things you said this morning. The things that you said this morning are pretty incredible. You probably just forgot to add that, you know, mums have eyes in the back of their heads. Oh, I might not actually have eyes in the back of my head, but last Wednesday I had a normal morning, went out, did all this work and everything, went to a few appointments, was out in the community, and I got home and I was kind of like, what's in the back of my head? I still had a roller in my hair that I didn't know was there. And I think, oh my goodness, where have I been? Who have I spoken to? And I've got this roller. I had a bit of a blonde moment. But speaking of blondes, there was these two women and they both would drive to work every day together, and one morning they were running a little bit late, and there was a brunette and there was a blonde, and the brunette jumped in the driver's seat and said, you know, we're running late, I'm going to have to break the speed limit a little bit. She said to the blonde, hey, can you just look out the back window and just check and make sure there's no cops there? So as they're driving along, speeding down the road, the brunette said to the blonde, can you see any cops? And the blonde said, yes, I can. And the brunette said, well, are they behind us? And the blonde said, well, yes, they're behind us. Well, are they close? And the blonde says, well, yes, they're close. And the brunette said, well, are they going to pull us over? Are they going to stop us? And the blonde says, well, no, I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. She goes, well, are the lights on? And the blonde said, yes, no. Yes, no. Yes, no. Thanks, Mum. See, mums are so supportive. You know, there's a lot of jokes about women drivers, but you know what the truth is? The truth is that a lot of women actually turn into good drivers. So if you're a good driver, watch out. Didn't get that one. A lot of women actually turn into good drivers. So if you're a good driver, watch out. Some of you guys are a bit blonde this morning. But I just have to say, can we get the headlines up here? I can bring this up because no one was actually hurt in this incident. But this was actually an Indonesian man, and we see that he actually drives off an unfinished highway in Indonesia because he was following Google Maps. I think we can learn a really, really good lesson from this. You know, that you can't always believe what Google says. You cannot always rely on AI. You've got to be careful. You've got to know what your source is in life. You know, what's informing you, what's leading you, what's guiding you. And so today, how much more so is it for us living our life that we need to make sure that we have reliable sources? And when we have a look at this idea of mothers and women, I want to go to the Bible because that is the most reliable source. We know, we've learnt from emails and text messages and Google and all kinds of things that you can't just believe whatever is texted to you. You know, often you'll get a message from the government or you'll have a prince contacting you through email who's promising you thousands of dollars, or you've won some kind of prize. If you just click on this, you can receive it. You've got to be careful of what the source is in everything because you most likely are going to download a virus or something like that. Well, how much more do we really want to make sure that what we're building our lives upon is on the truth? Tristan mentioned before how Jesus said, you know, that his teachings, that his truth becomes a firm foundation in our life that we can build upon. And when the storms of life come, and they do come at times, when we build upon his truth, It's firm and it's solid, and it helps us withstand those storms in life. So I actually want to just consider that Psalm 109 and verse 105 says, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." His word is able to lead us, direct us, and guide us. Won't send us off a bridge or anything like that, but we can trust in his word. So what does his Bible say about women? What does the word say about women? If you're at the women's night, I'm just going to mention this because I think it's a really important thing to mention. Who God actually created women to be. These days, you know, we watch a lot of movies with heroes. We've only just sort of been through the whole Marvel series again. And do you know, I couldn't believe it when Tristan told me that the Endgame and Infinity War grossed $30 billion in the US. $30 billion. Look, there must be something attractive about this idea of having heroes. I mean, who wouldn't want a hero that can just come in and rescue you when you need them? But, you know, the Bible speaks of a different kind of hero. When we go right back to the beginning and we read what happens in Genesis, we see that God's creating the world. And at the end of every day, he declares that it is good, and that it is good, and that it is good. And then we come to this situation, this moment, and God says, it's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. And he says this, I will make for him a suitable helper. Well, the actual word is Ezer. I will make for him a suitable Ezer. And so God created woman to be an Ezer. But do you know this word, Ezer, it's only used in other parts to describe God. It's used to describe someone that will come alongside. It's not this inferior kind of servant helper. It's talking about an ally, a rescuer, someone that comes to you in a time of need, that you're not alone, that there's someone there with you. And it reminded me of when we first started doing chaplaincy in crisis situations in the community, and a lot of the pastors and chaplains were really kind of thrown in the deep end with Black Saturday. Absolutely tragic what happened on that day. There was just so much loss. And at the end of the day, we'd always have to sit and debrief. And the head chaplain, I'll never forget what he said, because so many of us sat there and just thought, what good can we do? There's so much loss. There's so much pain. There's so much grief. What difference does it make? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, you know, just being present and being with a person on probably their worst day is something wonderful, that you can be with them, that they're not alone. And isn't it like that in life to know that you can have someone that's always there for you? You know, my mum is always there for us. I don't know how she does it. She's always there for all my brothers. She's always there for all the grandchildren. She's just always there. She's always available. She's always praying. She's just always thinking of you. And I remember a moment, and it just stays in my mind. A great example of this. When I was younger, I used to go and have horse riding lessons. And my little brother, I can't remember whether it was Andrew or James, wanted to get up on a horse, and he was only little. And so the lady who gave me lessons said to Mum, yep, you can lift him up on there. And so Mum got him and lifted him up on the horse. And my riding instructor yelled out, Love, hold on to his hair. Now, she meant for my little brother to hold on to the horse's mane. But you know what my mum did? She came down alongside him, held his hair as he was going along on the horse. She was ready and willing and available. Not quite, not quite what she meant. But God created woman. God created woman to be a strong ally, to be a rescuer, to be someone that comes alongside in a time of need. And we know that God's kingdom, it's an upside down kingdom. You've got to lose your life to find it. He tells us that the last will be first. You've got to humble yourself to be exalted. The Savior of the world comes as a little vulnerable baby in a manger. He does the extraordinary through the ordinary. this prophesied Messiah that was coming to be a Davidic redeemer to rescue Israel from the enemy. And he comes as a suffering servant. It's an upside down kingdom. Victory through surrender. God's kingdom, his victory isn't won so much through might. It's won through love. And when God created woman, I believe he just gave her that extra capacity to love. The kind of unconditional love. The love that sacrifices. The love that knows how to surrender. A love that is strong and determined and loves others unconditionally. A love that is willing to sacrifice. And so we see this incredible strength in a woman that comes through the way that they love. And this love, it nurtures. This love, it's not a superpower like we see in the movies where you can open portals or you can fly or anything like that. But there's this deep capacity to reach out and dig deep and love another person. And sometimes you don't even know that you have that in you until you're put in a circumstance where you're called upon to love somebody that might not be that lovable, or to show kindness when someone's not being kind at all. And so God gave this incredible ability to women to be courageous in a way that we see past what might be frightening us, so that we can reach past that and be courageous and save somebody in a time of need. We taught that love is the highest virtue. It's the most potent force driving human action and relationship. More than fear, more than anger, it's love that overcomes. We see the example of the sacrificial love of God from John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. It was love that motivated God to give his greatest sacrifice. We see the relationship between love and obedience, in that Jesus, in his teachings, encourages us to love your Lord with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. But the second is like it, to love your neighbour as yourself. And you see that this is where Jesus is being asked what the greatest command is. And you've got to remember, the Israelites, they had about 613 commandments. 613 laws. Like, I wouldn't even be able to remember that. I remember we were in Israel and we were there on the Sabbath, and you'd even get in a Shabbat elevator. And when you're in the elevator would just go to every level because you weren't allowed to press a button. You weren't allowed to do work. They'd have certain coffee machines. For some reason, you could pull the lever, but you couldn't press the button. So they'd have all these laws, all these religious laws that they had to obey. And yet someone comes up to Jesus and says, what's the greatest? And Jesus said, well, if we could just bring it down into two. It's to love God, and to love others. It's the greatest command. We see the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus talks about, that this kind of love is a love that's willing to be inconvenienced. It's a love that's willing to go out of its way, even for a stranger, for another person. And a love that breaks through barriers, whether they're social or cultural. It's a love that breaks through those barriers. It's a love that also, it transforms people. It changes people. We see when everybody knows this scripture from 1 Corinthians 13:4-7, when Paul's speaking about what love is. We speak about it in weddings all the time. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. I love this. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always preserves. Love never fails. This is the kind of capacity that God has given to us and that we see so much in women. And there's this tie between love and obedience. Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. And we're not keeping commands because we feel like we have to or we're frightened if we don't do it. We love him. We want to be like him. We want to share the love that he shared with us, with other people as well. We see this love in community in the early church. We read about what the early church was like. There was this incredible generosity and support for one another and unity. And love, we see this enduring nature of love. When Paul says, and now these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Love isn't something that's weak and soppy at all. Love is the most powerful thing that we can do. And God is love. I think the thing about love is it can make us feel vulnerable and it can make us feel weak. Because when we're giving out, you can feel like that, but it's the most powerful thing that we can do to love another person. We're coming into a series now when we're looking at how God has equipped us. We've looked at how God has created us, but how he has equipped us. And I think it's an interesting thing with God. And I think a mother or a parent is just a perfect example of how God equips us, because it really is on-the-job learning, isn't it? It's on the job learning. If you could get Cheryl at the age of 27 and have her here, and then have me here now I wouldn't probably have the energy that I had back then, but I'd probably say that I could be a better mother knowing what I know now, having made the mistakes that I've made now, having the experience that I have, than what I was going to be at 27. But God's not like that. God's an on-the-job kind of person. That's when he equips us and when we start to realize what he's put in us. You know, if parents waited until they were perfect to be a parent, we would have no children, because it's an on-the-job thing. God's classroom is the classroom of life. We learn as we go, and we're surprised as we go and we step out, because when God equips us, the thing about God is what he's put in us is actually activated by faith. It's sharpened by practice. It's by practice that we sharpen it. And then what he's put in us is offered back to him in service. And we see that in parenthood. And it's all about capacity. I'm sure over the next series we're going to be talking a lot about the equipping that God puts in us. And this might seem a bit unusual, but it reminds me of two events that I see in the Bible. You know, there was two miraculous catches of fish. There was one right at the beginning when the disciples were called. And there was one right at the end after Jesus had been resurrected. And so we see these two examples, but there's a little bit of a difference between the two. Both involve the disciples trusting the instruction of Jesus that when it didn't really seem possible to go and do it again and put the nets out. And both of them had such a catch of fish that it was seen as a miracle because it was so incredible. But there was things that were a little bit different about it. In the first time, we see the nets broke. The nets actually couldn't contain the blessing and everything that Jesus brought for them. It couldn't contain it. The second one, the nets didn't break. They had the capacity to contain it. In the first one, the disciples were wanting to follow Jesus, but they didn't really know him. They hadn't really experienced him. In the second one we see, they had walked with him for 3 years. They had been with Jesus. And I can imagine they weren't very easy 3 years. We see most of the time when Jesus is talking to them and teaching them, they're not fully understanding what he's saying. A lot of the disciples had to make sacrifices to follow Jesus. They had to deal with the popularity of Jesus, which wouldn't have been easy. Fame is fickle. But they also had to deal with the persecution of Jesus. They had to deal with also seeing someone they loved and believed in and followed, seeing him crucified. They had to deal with all of this. They'd made sacrifices and many things to follow Jesus. But what we see is different. Is 3 years of being around Jesus, their capacity was different. Something had changed. They now have seen the authority of Jesus. They've seen what Jesus can do in transforming lives. They've seen the difference. You know, you can always tell when someone hangs around Jesus, they have this capacity, they just have this wisdom, like Josh sharing his wisdom with us this morning. They have a peace about them. They're not as rattled. Their life is built upon a rock. You can see there's stability in them. There's something about a person that hangs around Jesus. They're different. They're changed. They're transformed by that experience. It's one thing to hear of him. It's another thing to walk with him and experience him and know him. And I think about Acts 4:13, when we see that Peter and John, they're actually brought before the rulers and the elders and the teachers of the law because they're in trouble because they've been preaching about Jesus. And this is what they say. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. Being with Jesus increases your capacity. I would say, if I went back to, you know, the 27-year-old Cheryl, that, you know, I'd say the big difference for me is that capacity, is that I've seen God's faithfulness. I believed for it. I wanted it. I trusted God, but now I've seen his faithfulness. I've seen his faithfulness at work. What would I say to 27-year-old Cheryl if I could go back? You know, and I don't think I know it all. I think there's many mothers in the room that know a lot more than me, that have walked that journey further ahead than I have. But I would say this to her: as much as I love my children and want the best for them, God wants it more. He wants it more. I would say my best and my timing is not the same as God's best and God's timing. It's different. It's different. I would say that children can be impacted greatly by the faith of their parents, but they have to walk in their own. They have to have their own story. They have to know Jesus for themselves. And we want that. We want them to have their own stories. And that can sometimes be the most difficult thing in being a mother, is letting go and trusting kids into the Lord's hands. And I've been blessed. I've got wonderful kids. Wonderful kids. And it's just been amazing to see them grow in their relationship with God and God's faithfulness towards them. You know, we read in Proverbs that it says, Proverbs 22 verse 6, train your child in the way of the Lord and he will not depart from it. Now, this does not mean that they won't go their own way and have their own journey, but it means that there's something in them, there's a deposit in them. There's the faithfulness of God that he will draw them back. I want to actually share a story about a lady, and this lady's name was Susanna. And when she was young, she promised the Lord that for every hour she spent in entertainment, she would give him in prayer in the word. That's a pretty big promise. She was married to a preacher, but unfortunately this preacher couldn't really manage money very well. He was often thrown into debtors' prisons at times, and at times he would disappear off preaching, but he would leave her with all her children to look after them. She had 19 children. Only 10 of them survived. One of them was crippled. Another one didn't speak until about 6 years old, and she was often sick herself. They had their house burned down 2 times, and this was believed to have been done by the church of the husband. So make sure you keep people in the good books, okay? House burned down 2 times. Someone slit the cow's udders so that they couldn't get milk. Their dog was killed, and their flax field was burnt. She had a hard life. Taking care of the house and raising so many children meant that she actually didn't have any time for entertainment at all. She really didn't have time for much. She would work the garden, milk the cow, school the children, and manage the entire house for herself. But something she did have was conviction. And we read in her journal that she had a deep conviction that one day she would stand before the Lord and give an account of every soul that she had. At one point, she was actually running a small group for the church that had grown bigger than the size of the husband's church. And he wanted her to close it down. And she said, you close it down if you have to, but you take the responsibility off me because I have this conviction that people have been entrusted into my care. She had a conviction. And you know what else she had? She had an apron. And though she could not give the time in prayer that she wanted to give, she said to the kids, you know, when you see mum with the apron over her head, she's praying. She's praying. You don't disturb her. She's praying. Well, this woman had such an impact on her children. Her name was Susanna Wesley. Her sons, John and Charles, were powerhouses for the glory of God. John Wesley preached to nearly 1 million people in his day. At the age of 70, he delivered the gospel message of salvation to 32,000 people without a microphone. Don't know how he did it. Everywhere he went, he brought revival. And we know that Charles wrote over 9,000 hymns, many of them which we're still singing today. Everywhere he went, he brought revival. And I just think about that first catch of fish, that the net couldn't contain it. You see, often with revival, this happens. Many people come, but if you don't have the systems in place, if you don't have the structures in place to grow and disciple people, it can be lost. The fruit of that revival can be lost. Well, when we see what John Wesley did was he actually followed what his mother did with her small group and with the children. It's known as the small group movement of the Methodist Church. Because of that movement, it was able to contain and disciple all the people that came to Christ in those revivals. And that is the impact of a godly woman in their life. I just love that all she had was an apron, but she worked with that. All she had was conviction, but she worked with that. And I think of, David, all he had was a slingshot. But it's what he had. It's what he knew. It was his faith. I think of the widow, and all she had was a little oil and a little flour. But she gave it up to the prophet. She trusted God with that. I think of the boy in the multitude that only had some fish and some loaves, but he gave it to Jesus. I think the blind man who was healed, and all he had was his testimony. Well, I don't know. I was blind, and now I can see. And he used what he had, and he went around telling everybody what had happened to him. God puts a deposit in us, but he also asks us to look at what we have. What do you have? What's in your hand? An apron's not just an apron when you go under it and you meet with God. A slingshot is not just a slingshot when you use it knowing that God's fighting the battle for you. So we have this mighty woman of God that impacted her sons in such a way. And this is what John actually says in one of his quotes. He says, I learned more about Christianity from my mother than from all the theologians in England. And I think that that's an incredible testimony. So I just want to wrap up this morning and remind you, ladies, you are born Ezra. You were created to be one that would come alongside others and love them, show kindness to them, show compassion to them, even when it doesn't make sense to them. And that kind of love just melts people's hearts. And I think what can sometimes happen is we can get tired, we can get hurt, and the enemy wants us to stop loving. He wants us to stop. He wants us to be tired. He wants us to be hurt. He wants us to build walls. But I'm just here to tell you today that God has given you a superpower. He has given you something that will not only impact your children, but their children and their children. And we know the world is needing this at the moment. Look at the Kids Hope that we do, sending people into the schools to be mentors for children, a significant other, to be that special person in their life, even if it's 1 hour a week. God equips us. But it doesn't often feel like it. It's on-the-job training. We see the disciples when they stepped out, they were stepping out in faith. They would open their mouths and then they would be filled with God's words. It's a stepping out in faith. God equips us, but it's activated by faith. It's sharpened by practice. And it's offered back to God in service. And God gives us as a capacity. Our capacity grows as we walk with Jesus, as we experience him. He changes our perspective. He changes our heart. He transforms us as we walk with him. Our capacity grows for us to do the work of God. So never underestimate even the difficult things you're walking through. God's growing your capacity in him. Our personal relationship with God is just that. We can share it with others, we can teach our children, but in the end, every person has to nurture that relationship with God. I really enjoy when I do equine therapy with some of the clients that come, and I teach them how they can get along with a horse. I can give them some tools, but only they can build the connection. They're the ones that have to do that. And I often talk to people that are doing the group that's what it's like with God. We can direct you, we can encourage you to do certain things, but only you can grow your relationship with God. And children can walk and be blessed under the faith of their parents, but there comes a time when they need to experience God. And why wouldn't you want to? Like, God is amazing. Waking up and knowing God every day is a huge adventure. It changes your life. And so you might have heard your parents talk about it, but find out for yourselves. Find out who this God is. He wants you to know him personally. And so I want to give a little invitation today. I'm not going to ask anybody to come forward or anything like this. But, if you're a person that you feel like, hey, I feel like I'm holding back with the way I can love other people just because of hurt or disappointment or frustration. God has put a capacity in you that comes from him. And I remember Corrie ten Boom talking about when she had to forgive the man that she saw that really killed her sister and father. And she didn't think she had the capacity in her. But in faith, as she reached out her hand, she felt the forgiveness flow through her from God. As you step out and you bring down those walls that you've built in your heart, God will refill you with love and with patience and with kindness and the things that you need. But I just want to speak today to some of the kids here that you've grown up. You've seen your parents. You've seen your parents' journey. You've seen their faith. You've seen what God's done. I want you to know God's calling